Welcome to the Puget Sound Kelp Research and Monitoring Work Group, our October meeting. And we are recording this meeting, as you heard, so please behave accordingly, be well behaved. And as many of you know, this monitoring work group is an open forum for information sharing and collaboration, and it was identified as a useful group to have during the Kelp Plan work. So you can find old meeting agendas, notes, and recordings on our website. And if you want to either join or leave this list, just send us an email. This meeting marks the end of our 2-year pilot, where we've had quarterly meetings. And so at the end of this meeting, I'm going to ask you all some questions about whether we should continue or change this work group. And we're looking for input on that now. And then finally, please, everyone in the chat, please introduce yourself and provide any updates or links to work you're doing that we're not talking about yet, and request any topics you'd like us to cover in upcoming meetings. So there's been a slight change in today's agenda because sadly, Jennifer Hahn had a family emergency. And so she'll be speaking at our next meeting instead of today. And so there's been a slight change in the 11 to 11:30 slot. So if you're speaking during that slot, take a peek at how we've reorganized things. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Elizabeth Spalding to kick off the brief updates, talking about the new RFP.
Great, thank you, Helen. So I believe I have probably met many of you, but my name's Elizabeth Spalding. I'm with the Habitat Strategic Initiative, and I am the Marine Vegetation Implementation Strategy Lead. And I am going to share a little bit of information regarding an RFP opportunity that we have coming up that we think you would probably be interested in. Can someone tell me if they can see my screen? Wendell says yes, great. Okay, so a little bit about the Habitat Strategic Initiative, in case you aren't familiar. We are a state agency team. We are co-led by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and Washington Department of Natural Resources, and I'm on the DNR side. And we operate through funding from EPA through the National Estuary Program. And our goal is to enable and accelerate habitat restoration and protection geared toward our implementation strategies. And so as I mentioned, I'm the Marine Vegetation Implementation Strategy Lead that covers kelp and eelgrass specifically, but we also have floodplains and estuaries, we have a land development and cover strategy, and we also have a shoreline armoring strategy. And so let me see if I can advance that. So as I mentioned, we have a cooperative agreement with the EPA, which means that one of the things we do to advance our implementation strategies, as well as the Puget Sound Action Agenda, is we basically manage pass-through funds. We distribute funding from the EPA's National Estuary Program and the geographic program funds to the recovery community to advance different habitat type projects. And this is really a unique funding source in that it funds projects that are harder to fund through traditional funding sources. So for example, we can fund planning, we can fund capacity building, we can fund outreach and communications, research, projects that don't have as many dedicated sources for restoration, such as capital improvement projects. And so this year we have a new funding opportunity. The Habitat Strategic Initiative, Shellfish Strategic Initiative, and Stormwater Strategic Initiative have all released RFPs with the intention of identifying projects that will implement one of our implementation strategies, as well as further the work of the Puget Sound Action Agenda. So I wanted to share a little bit of information about that RFP and then direct you to some resources because with the Marine Vegetation Implementation Strategy being the newest strategy to join the Habitat Strategic Initiative, this opens up a lot of opportunity for the kelp world. So some quick things about our funding. With this funding round, we are anticipating that we will fund approximately $9 million. And this will be within the range of $200,000 to $800,000 per project proposal. So that's a pretty big bucket of change per project. In a moment, I'm going to talk a little bit about our investment priorities, but our intention is to award 1.8 million per investment priority. And these projects can last anywhere from 2 to 4 years. So because we are at the beginning of our funding cycle with EPA, we have a little bit longer of a window than we will later in our funding cycle. So we're looking for projects that do have longer implementation timelines and projects that engage a variety of recovery community members. So collaborations and partnerships are highly encouraged. So as I mentioned, we have investment priorities that we're hoping to advance along with our implementation strategies. And so these 5 investment priorities were developed by our advisory team, and they include changing planning paradigms, supporting project development and readiness, behavior change, regulatory support, and information and evaluation. And when I'm done sharing my slides, I'm going to put a link into the chat with that links you to the funding page. So you can actually go to our investment priority, our investment plan, and read more about these priorities and what they entail. And they actually include some project examples as well in this solicitation. So we're hoping to not just advance the implementation strategies, but those projects that we look at, we're hoping will fit into one of these buckets. And something I just want to mention when we're looking at information and evaluation, that's where you would probably think about research projects that would advance our understanding of either existing conditions, or if there's a need around management, some management questions, research that would help our understanding and lead to better management strategies. So some key dates for everyone to know. So the RFP actually went live on October 4th. It will be open for 9 weeks. So all project proposals should be submitted by December 6th. We will spend January and February evaluating those and working with our advisory team to come up with a draft funding recommendation. And once that's approved, we will be reaching out to those successful project proposals and establishing contracts. So probably March 2023 is when you would hear from the Habitat Strategic Initiative team around the status of those proposals. And the earliest we'd probably be under contract is in April, but the goal would be to have all projects under contract by July. And then, as I mentioned, the period of performance for this one is a little bit longer than it has been historically. We do have 2 to 4 years for implementation on those projects. So again, we have an opportunity to think big here. So I will again drop some information in the chat so you can read our investment plan that speaks to those investment priorities, both within the Habitat Strategic Initiative, but also within shellfish and stormwater. And then on that page, you will have the solicitation and the application. Just so you know, the application is a fillable PDF, so it is pretty streamlined. So please do look at that in advance so you kind of know how it's structured. And then the last thing I want to leave you with is that there will be an applicant webinar on October 17th from 1 to 3 p.m. That's going to be on Zoom. The first hour will be very informational around how to find information within the solicitation, and then also just how to functionally fill out that application. And then the second hour will be questions and answers. So that's where we can address your initial questions around project eligibility, criteria, those types of questions. If you have questions in advance, we can send them, please send them to our team. You can send them to me and I'll forward them to our policy leads. And that will help us prepare the webinar presentation so that we know really what's at the top of everyone's minds to make sure that we're addressing your needs. So I'll throw those links in the chat, and I look forward to seeing some excellent marine vegetation proposals. And I'm going to stop sharing and I think hand it over to Wendell for our next brief update.
Yes, thanks, Elizabeth. So can everyone see my screen, hopefully? All right, cool. I'm just going to keep it in not quite presenter mode just for ease. So I'm Wendell Raymond. I'm part of the project team working on the floating kelp vital sign, which I should spell right. Indicator project along with many folks at DNR and various other partners. So just a quick update here on where we are with the project. About 9 months ago, we started building the indicator and exploring a lot of different options and producing reports and holding workshops to get feedback from the public on what this vital sign indicator should be. So where we are now is we're moving into the final stage from now into May of next year. And just a few days ago, comments on the last report and workshop that we had that maybe you attended last May and June were released. It's just a summary document that collates all the various comments that we got, either just from email or conversations or from the workshop itself. And that workshop focused on sort of the draft or proposed indicator options. We are now moving into the refining and finalizing stage, where we've taken all that feedback and we want to produce the proposed indicator. The report for that is going to come out December 20th, and then followed up by a workshop, which we're calling Workshop 3, or the workshop on this third report, on January 10th. We'll summarize comments by March 15th, and then, or that's when comments will be due, and then they will be summarized and released on April 1st. And then another quick turnaround, we plan to release the final report and other products and protocols, et cetera, at the beginning of May, and submit the indicator data to Puget Sound Info around May 15th. So just a little more detail, if you go to the DNR Kelp monitoring site and scroll down just a little bit, you'll see this heading on Kelp indicator coming to Puget Sound vital signs. And there's links to the previous reports and the summary of the comments from those reports and workshops. If you want to go straight to the phase 2 public comments, you can scan that QR code that'll bring you to that PDF. As Helen mentioned, if you want to get in contact, you can contact us at this email. We love hearing from you, and it's been really important for the project team to have other perspective on this indicator development. And then finally, just a reminder on these big save the dates coming up. December 20th will be the proposed indicator will be released, and that will be followed up by a workshop on January 10th. I believe the timing of that workshop is still TBD, but it'll be sometime January 10th. And that's all I got.
Great. Thank you, Wendell. Okay, we are just going to rapid fire with these updates. We're now going to hand it over to Max Showalter and Cynthia Harbison with DNR to talk a little bit about the kelp forest and eelgrass meadow health and conservation plan.
Sorry, I was double muted and then all my screens went wonky. I hope everyone's looking at a slide as well.
Looks great.
So hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Harbison and here with Max, who we are both co-leading the statewide kelp and eelgrass health and conservation plan development that we'll be working on in depth next year, but then also looking forward into the future. And what we've been tasked to do is to identify at least 10,000 acres of priority kelp forest and eelgrass meadow habitat for conservation or restoration. And so we're really hoping to build upon a lot of the work that's already been done in both the kelp recovery plan as well as the eelgrass recovery plan. Both of those are, which of course focused on Puget Sound, and we are tasked with looking statewide, but we'll definitely be building upon some of the work that's been already done in those areas. And I think much like the impetus for bringing this work group together as one of the actions from the kelp recovery plan, there's two goals within that plan that are to identify or to restore kelp and conserve kelp. And so that's we're kind of taking those two like larger picture goals and I think drilling down into them. So really kind of one branch of implementing that plan as well in one facet. And so one of our early deliverables is this engagement plan, because one of the things we'll be doing is developing a collaboratively developed prioritization framework to identify what are those habitats, what are those acres that we're going to be prioritizing for conservation or protection. And that will be finalized in December 2022. So we're still working through a lot of the details of what that's going to look like and specific timelines, but we'll be releasing all that information shortly and sharing that out with you all and with our other partners, stakeholders, and a specific tribal engagement pathway as well. And we have a QR code there on the screen as well as the actual URL for more information and to track kind of where we are in this process. We'll be updating that dnr.wa.gov Kelp and Eelgrass Plan website, and we also have an email list sign up there as well. And I think that's the crux of our updates for right now.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to Vienna with the Nature Conservancy, who is going to give a little update on the expansion of Kelp Watch to Washington.
Sure. Hi, everyone. For those of you I have not met yet, my name is Vienna Sacamano. I'm an ocean scientist at TNC, where I lead our kelp mapping and monitoring program. And Elizabeth, before I proceed, can I make sure my slides are up? Okay. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Great. Well, hi, everyone. Yep, I recently relocated to Washington State, and today I'm calling in from the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples and looking forward to sharing out an update about a tool that was a collaborative project between the Nature Conservancy, UCLA, UCSB, and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. For those of you who have not interacted with kelpwatch.org yet, this tool hosts the world's largest dynamic map of kelp forest canopy in both time and space. And the spatial extent of these data are from Baja California, Mexico to the Oregon-Washington state border, with data represented seasonally from 1984 through the present. And I'm here today because this tool will soon include data on kelp canopy along the outer coast of Washington, as well as many other major geographies around the world where floating forests are found. So a little orientation to this tool today. So history on the motivation behind kelpwatch.org, for those who are unfamiliar, this web tool was created really to increase the accessibility of peer-reviewed Landsat-derived kelp canopy maps that are currently hosted and publicly available on the Santa Barbara Coastal LTER website. In about 2019, the Nature Conservancy partnered with Kyle Kavanaugh at UCLA, Tom Bell at UCSB, and then eventually Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, basically to design a web tool that would lower the barriers to entry for making these data actionable. The LTER data, they are a time series of emergent kelp canopy area of giant and bull kelp derived from 5 different Landsat sensors, where kelp canopy is composed of the portion of fronds and stipes floating on the surface of the water, so emergent kelp canopy. And this data set does not differentiate between the 2 species, but classifies the floating pixels. A little methodology, it's pretty thorough on the SB LTER website for those who want to dive into the details, but just a little background so you're familiar if you decide to go into kelpwatch.org to know what you're looking at. The canopy area data, they're given for individual 30 by 30 meter pixels, which is the native spatial resolution of the Landsat sensors, for all coastal areas along that geographic extent. And then the coastal areas like land and intertidal, they are masked out of each image. And then the authors use a decision tree to classify each coastal pixel as one of 4 categories: ocean, water, cloud, land, and kelp. And then for each 30 by 30 meter pixel, that is classified as kelp canopy. The authors use a multiple end members spectral mixture analysis, basically to estimate the fraction of that pixel that is covered by kelp canopy. And then finally, to obtain the estimates of the area, the canopy fraction of the pixel is then just simply multiplied by the area, which is about 900 square meters. And then this data set, in order to average out the effects of currents and tides on the estimates of canopy area, the authors created basically seasonal averages of the data, which are what are displayed on KelpWatch. So quick high-level background. Here's just a quick demo on how the tool works. This web tool basically displays the publicly available data set I just talked about and allows a user to zoom into their region, time frame, and even season of interest and visualize changes in kelp canopy over time, and then also see corresponding metrics on kelp canopy area and percent cover, and then importantly, freely download these data so that they can interact with them. While the methods behind these data do differ from monitoring programs that use color imagery to map kelp canopy presence, this large spatiotemporal breadth of the data do provide the opportunity to assess coast-wide trends in canopy-forming kelps with classification methods that are consistent across time and space via the calibration of those 5 Landsat sensors. So the result really is this data set that allows researchers, managers, stakeholders to study interstate and also international trends in kelp dynamics over the last 40 years. And this is particularly important, especially in response to really large stressor events like marine heat waves, right, that can go beyond state and national boundaries. And importantly, also this time series gives researchers and users the ability to try and distinguish the impacts of climate change on kelp abundance, which is an important management challenge that requires pretty long-term, plus 30 years time series data at large spatial scales in order to separate climate-related trends from other sources of variability in these highly dynamic systems. These data that are displayed on KelpWatch, they've been used in nearly 40 peer-reviewed publications so far. And this growing body of literature suggests that these data are well-suited to investigate kelp dynamics at larger spatial scales, but at the local scale, application might require higher resolution data. So quickly, for example, that the areas close to shore or areas that are exposed during low tide will be removed during the land masking procedure that I talked briefly about earlier. And thus the kelp area within those pixels will not be measured. And then also areas with really sparse kelp canopy, think like delicate fringing canopy, might not be detected by the classifier. Sarah Hamilton, if you're familiar with her work, performed a miss rate analysis on this data set for bull kelp canopies in Oregon. And she found that the pixels with less than 10% kelp canopy were often missed, but pixels with greater than 15% kelp canopy were rarely missed. So all that is to say, this tool is suited to be applied to large scale questions and analyses. So I'll cap it there. If anybody does have questions for this tool, feel free to send me a follow-up email. Happy to connect. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Vienna. Okay, that ends our first round of brief updates. So now we're going to move into our first larger discussion. So I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Whitty with the Northwest Straits Commission, and he is going to talk a little bit about the inventory he's compiling for the research and monitoring projects associated with kelp in advancement of the kelp plan. So Jeff, I will let you take it away.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, and can you see my slide okay?
Yeah, it's not, yep, now it looks great.
Okay, great. So as Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Jeff Whitty. I work with the Northwest Straits Commission, and as part of my position with the Northwest Straits, I am the project coordinator for the Puget Sound Kelp Conservation and Recovery Plan. And today I will be doing a very brief review of the kelp plan in case there's anybody here that's yet unfamiliar with the kelp plan. But then I'll focus on our current work where we're assessing the actions of the kelp plan via creation of a Puget Sound Kelp project inventory. So again, very, very briefly, the kelp plan was published in May 2020. And it provides a research and management framework for a coordinated and collaborative approach to improve understanding of kelp forest population changes and implement and strengthen recovery and protective measures in Puget Sound. This framework is composed of 6 goals, which you can see here on the right side of your screen, and their associated actions. And these goals focus on kelp stressors, ecosystem value, distribution and trends, protected areas, kelp restoration, and promotion of awareness engagement through education. And you can read more about the kelp plan and the goals and actions at this link at the bottom here. And I believe Dana will put that in the chat for you all. The kelp plan also has a kelp plan coordination advisory committee. And this committee is constructed from roughly 15 individuals from a variety of local organizations with backgrounds in kelp research, policy, and education. And then we also have a few individuals from outside of the state, from California, Alaska, and British Columbia, also experienced with kelp conservation recovery, which bring in an outside perspective, which has been very helpful. So this committee has helped construct and prioritize a list of coordination tasks, including the assessment of kelp plan actions and highlighting what progress has been made and what steps can be taken to help us move forward. And it's our goal that this can be used as a tool to aid in prioritizing and implementing future efforts and be useful not only for kelp conservation initiatives like the marine vegetation implementation strategy, the Kelp Node, the Eelgrass and Kelp health and conservation plan, but also funders, governments, researchers, and other invested stakeholders. And so basically to start this off, we are creating a Puget Sound kelp project inventory to determine what projects are out there, basically who's doing what in Puget Sound and how they are involved in the kelp plan and what actions of the kelp plan these projects align with. Well, to collect this information, to build up this inventory, we started off by sending out a survey in the summer months, roughly June through August. And we sent the link to the survey to over 350 people known to be involved with kelp in Puget Sound. And from that, we got roughly information on roughly 50 Puget Sound kelp projects, which was a great turnaround, and I was very happy with this. But we do realize that we sent this survey out in pretty much the busiest time of the year. And not everybody had a chance to finish the survey or look at the survey. And so we do want to construct a more complete inventory. We do know there are projects that were not submitted, and we want to give people this chance to make sure they are included in this inventory and get the word out about their projects. And so we are opening up a second round for this survey and asking people to complete it by November 23rd, which is the day before US Thanksgiving. And you can do so by using this survey link here at the bottom. Dana will put that in the chat. Look how quick she is. And so if you want to go there and fill in that survey, that would be great. We do get a lot of questions whether if people should submit a survey or not. And so just to help answer that question, if you are a project lead or a partner lead and have not submitted a survey yet, please do so. And we are looking for information, not just for Puget Sound, but Washington as a whole. The kelp plan does focus on Puget Sound, but we still want to capture information from the coast and straits as well. Also, if you are unsure if one of your project partners have already submitted a survey, feel free to go ahead and submit it anyways. And then we can basically comb through the data to see if we have any duplicates, which at this point has been very minimal. And if you're still unsure if your project fits and it should be included, feel free to email me at witty, it's WHITTY @nwstraits.org, and we can discuss whether it fits or not and go from there. So the information we are collecting on this survey include just general project information, such as project title, contact information, goals, and objectives. It's pretty simple. We also have a page that looks at project specifics, basically like what location you're working in, what species are involved, very rough ballpark estimates of annual costs. And then we're also looking at what actions or goals your project aligns with from the Kelp plan. And so very briefly, I'm just going to give you a taste of the survey. The survey is about 10 to 8 pages long, and they're pretty short pages. And it just depends on your answers and how many goals your project aligns with from the Kelp plan. This page right here is one of the page that deals with the specifics of your projects, like the costs and locations. The one question I want to show you is down here at the very bottom. This is where we ask you, what Kelp plan goal does your project align with? If you are unfamiliar with the goals or actions, you can click on this link here, which will take you to the Kelp plan. You can learn all about it. Otherwise, click on the drop-down link and you can select a goal that your project most aligns with. If it aligns with more than one goal, you'll be able to select additional goals on subsequent pages. You also have the option of my project does not align with any, or I am uncertain. If you are uncertain, again, I will contact you and we can work through this together. So go ahead and you select one goal and hit next, and that will take you to a goal specific page where then you can see all the different actions for that goal. This right here is goal 3, which works with distribution and trends. So you just select all the actions that your project aligns with. And then you go down to this drop-down box, same question as before. Does your project align with a certain goal? You can then select a second goal if it does align with it, and then you can continue that page. Otherwise, once you are done with the goals, you select this project program does not align with additional Kelp plan goals, and that will take you to the end. You do not need to go back and reselect a goal if you've already visited that page. And we want, again, give everybody the opportunity to be part of this survey and get their project in this inventory. And not everybody is going to want to complete the survey. And so we're giving people additional options. And if you don't want to do the survey, but you do want to get your project into the inventory, feel free to drop your name and contact information in the chat or email me directly, again, witty@nwstraits.org. I will set up a one-on-one project discussion with you over email, Zoom, or phone, whatever works best for you. Also, for projects that have, or organizations or individuals that have 3 or more projects, you're welcome to retake that survey over and over and over, but we do have a much more streamlined process for organizations with multiple projects. So please email me and I can send you that form as well. So with that, I just want to conclude and ask if there's any questions. Again, feel free to contact me or use this link to look at the Kelp plan further if you have additional questions. So I guess I'll stop sharing.
We have plenty of time for questions. So while people mull over their questions, Jeff, we do have one from Megan so far that says, can a table be posted somewhere to show who has replied so far? How easy is that to do?
That's a good question. We do have the inventory already started and we're working through it we have a few duplicates, so we're working through that. But we could possibly get something set up. I'll have to talk internally to see what we're allowed to do. But yeah, I can send out an email if I can figure that out.
Okay.
Good question.
So other questions, feel free to either throw it in the chat or you can raise your hand. Plenty of time.
Yes, maybe. So Dana asked a question if we could share it now on my screen. I am going to see if I can. Am I still sharing with you all?
No.
Okay. If you have any questions, meanwhile, feel free to ask.
I'll just, while you're searching, it looks like Hank is seconding Megan's question. I think this window has been open long enough that people are forgetting whether or not they responded to your survey.
And I'll just chime in that a lot of our projects we do collaboratively. And so you don't know if someone else filled it out for you. You know, like I might have filled it out for Todd and so what I'm doing with Jeff, he's very kind, is we've grouped projects into larger projects. And so you can fill out like your portion and then link to a larger program. And so, yeah, I suggest if you're like me, you may need to call Jeff for help.
Okay, so I do have my version. Some people have already seen this and it is very colorful. So just bear with me. Can everybody see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So these are, I don't know if it's too small. I can try and increase the size for you. These are the different projects. It doesn't fit on my screen at once, unfortunately, but it's a good thing. We've got a lot of projects here. But we do have like, just go back through this really quick. Puget Sound Restoration Fund, they submitted a whole heap of projects. It's really impressive. A lot of the MRCs have submitted a lot of their kayak survey projects. We got some aquaculture projects in here as well. Policy. I'll just go slowly through this. The problem with this is obviously you're not going to be able to see all the information you probably need to look at. Having it right in front of you might be easier. So again, I'll try and work on that. But these are the projects we have for now. And again, we do have some duplicates, which are what the color is, or potential duplicates, but yeah.
So Jeff, another question we got while people are kind of looking this over. Are you coordinating with Brenda and the Pew Charitable Trust, because they're also kind of wrapping their arms around all of the work happening on kelp and Puget Sound? And I think Brenda is actually here as well today. So if either one of you want to talk about what that coordination looks like.
Yes, we have had some brief discussions about largely the coordination efforts and kind of the bigger picture options. I don't think we've actually just gone into the weeds about the individual projects yet, but yes, we have been connected.
Okay. Brenda, anything you want to add if you're out there?
Hi, yeah, no, I'll just co-sign onto what Jeff said. And this is wonderful. I'm loving seeing this all in the spreadsheet. And so, yeah, we've talked about big picture stuff where something like this maybe lives, this type of information, how it can be accessible to everybody. So we'll continue that conversation, and I can shuttle over anything that I might have that is missing, and maybe we can reach out to those folks to make sure that these are added into his database.
Great.
All right.
We have a few comments, but no questions in the chat. So Jeff, I'll just kind of direct you over there. Any last questions before we move on to our next speaker? Okay, thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now going to move on to a brief overview, or an update, I should say, around the Kelp Node, which many of you have probably heard about or maybe even participating with. So I will hand this over to Margot Hessing-Lewis and Jasmine Schuster.
Thanks. So I think I'm going to be sharing my screen because Jasmine's on the west coast of Vancouver Island at Banfield and has low bandwidth. But before we get started, this is going to be kind of an intro to the Kelp Node, but also directing you to sign up for some working groups that are upcoming. So there's the website, so you can all kind of go there in advance as Jasmine goes through the presentation. I'll share my screen. Okay, this is what the sign up page should look like. We'll go there again at the end of Jasmine's talk. But to note, scroll down, 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 keep going to the very end for the sign up and registration section. Okay. Get these loaded. Okay, I think I have it up on the screen, and I will pass this over to Jasmine for a quick presentation.
Awesome, thank you, Margot. Hi everyone, I'm Jasmine Schuster. I just started a postdoc at UVic in partnership with Hakai. And as part of my role there, I will coordinate the Kelp Node together with Margot. And this Kelp network has been emerging over the last year or so, and we're about ready to get people to sign up for a working group. So we'll just give you a brief overview of the network structure and the different working groups today. Right, can you move, Margot? So the Kelp Node is structured to be a network, a transboundary network for Canada and the US to bring together Kelp practitioners across Washington State and British Columbia mostly. And it fits into some larger frameworks. I'll just let Margot talk about that for a minute.
So the Kelp Node is kind of embedded under a couple of layers of this UN ocean decade, which is unfurling over the next 10 years. It just started last year. So under that, we have a project called the Northeast Pacific Biodiversity Action Network. It's very much at its inception. It's meant to bring together an assemblage of different projects that do transboundary work in our neck of the woods. And so within that, we're hoping to highlight this emerging Kelp Node, as we're calling it, which is really, as Jasmine just said, a transboundary cross-border group, starting with BC and Washington. And it might expand from there, but we're going to keep it tangible, our local borders, focusing on the Salish Sea and beyond. To start. So just to situate, this is the node or the network itself is this kind of independent entity, but it is embedded underneath this hierarchy of this Northeast Pacific Biodiversity Action Network, which is an endorsed project under this Marine Life 2030 global program. So that's a global program, and it's received endorsement from the UN Ocean Decade. Back to you, Jasmine.
Yep. Next slide. Okay, so the Kelp Node framework is built around this biodiversity action cycle that this diagram here shows, where we have topic-specific working groups that address different elements of these 4 action clusters that we have here. So the way this is structured is that basically we have actions that center around gathering data and knowledge, which will lead to analysis and synthesis of that gained knowledge and data, which will lead to policy and management actions, and eventually educational and participative science actions. And so each of these 4 action clusters has specific actions as goalposts that different working groups will work towards. We can move, please. So these here are 5 initial working groups that we are ready to kick off. We have 1 working group on floating canopy kelps and spatial indicators, dynamics management, and protected areas. We have a subtitled kelp and kelp ecosystem services working group, 1 group on kelp drivers of change or stressors of kelp. We have a group on kelp early life histories and restoration, as well as participative kelp science and training. And as I mentioned, there will be specific actions for each of these working groups that fall under the action clusters. And these will move into specific deliverables. And it will depend on each working group what these deliverables might ultimately look like. It could be that 1 group wants to work towards a peer-reviewed publication. Other groups might just want to bring together and share data that will be collated into a spreadsheet or build a story map yeah, so this can vary based on the priorities that each working group and the leaders of the working groups will set. And because this is a transboundary network, we aim to have leadership for each of these working groups from both Washington and BC. And these leaders come from various institutions such as DFO or NOAA, Friday Harbor Labs, UVic, Hawkeye, etc. And these 5 working groups are aligned with the Puget Sound Kelp goals that Jeff just lined out for us. Yes, and so we will have meetings for these working groups every 2 weeks, where we will basically rotate from 1 to 5 through the working groups, which means that each thematic working group will roughly meet once every 4 months. And we're hoping to get you all to sign up to one or all or however many you like of these working groups. Okay, next slide, please. So these initial 5 working groups are what we are ready to start now. But looking into the future, we also want to get this data integration working group going, which will work towards integrating cross-cutting elements from all the other working groups. And we're actually, if anyone feels inspired to sign up for taking on a leadership role for this working group, we would love to hear from you. And a little further into the future, we're also hoping to get some groups going on kelp harvest and kelp reporting and transboundary planning. So these pieces are kind of the bringing it all together, future synthesis pieces that will combine all the elements from the initial 5 working groups. And currently, we're thinking that these will launch after 1 or 2 cycles of the initial 5 groups. And so the communications between the working groups will be fostered through reporting out by the working group leaders. And there will be some network-wide discussions and get-togethers, maybe once a year, where we'll synthesize all the outputs from the different working groups. And so the ultimate goal is to have transboundary kelp reporting and planning. Okay, next one, please. So where we're at so far is that we've had our initial meetings with the working group leaders of working groups 1 to 5, where we've reviewed some of the key actions and discussed timelines and a phased work plan. And the next step is to officially kick off our full working groups, including participants, at the start of November. And we will then kind of go over what we've been through with the leaders again to brainstorm some of the tasks and deliverables, identify some of the priorities, what the different working groups might want to work on. And so the participants are really who will drive the work ahead. And yeah. And in these next meetings, we will also prioritize what we want to focus on for the next year. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We would love for many of you to sign up for these working groups. I think Margaret has already posted the link, but here it is again. This gives you a little form to select which working groups you're interested in. You can choose one, you can choose all of them. You can also sign up for a broader network-wide listserv and indicate some of your availability. And then after that, we will follow up with some Zoom registration links once we've settled on some dates that make sense for everyone. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks.
So, and just to say that this network really is going to be bottom-up driven. So we know that everyone in this room has probably a very, very different busy schedule. So make sure you kind of think about which working groups you're really interested in signing up for and choose those and thinking about which ones you might actively be able to participate in vis-a-vis your bandwidth. All of the information will be openly available, and as Jasmine said, we'll report out regularly, hopefully through this group, as well as the BC Kelp analytical group that meets monthly in British Columbia. And we did solicit interest through this group last spring. there was high interest at that point in time. So we kind of expect that we'll see a similar level of enthusiasm for signups this time as well. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we can arrange to have a meeting too, especially if you're interested in playing a leadership role or helping out in some capacity with this. Thanks.
And we do have some time. We are a little bit ahead of schedule. So if there are any questions quickly that we want to ask now, feel free to throw them in the chat or raise your hand.
Maybe one thing to mention is that on the sign up link, there's also a list of some of the actions that we've already mapped out for each of the working groups. So if you want to read a bit more specifically about what the goals are, you can find more detail there.
Excellent. Okay, I don't see any hands. I don't see anything in the chat. One more. Oh, we've got one. Paul.
Hi, just wondering, what benefit do you get from being part of the UN Ocean Decade? Has that helped?
Well, we're just at the inception of the Ocean Decade right now. The idea is, I guess, twofold. One, potentially access to funding opportunities that come down the pipes through national and international efforts. So there's definitely those are coming to the fore. And then secondarily connected to some of these other international networks. Other than that, it's a stamp, it's a logo, and it helps kind of elevate the work that everyone is doing collectively, I would say.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions? There's a request to put the Quadra Center link in the chat. So I'll let you share that. Any other questions before we move on? Helen.
So I'm really excited about working closely with between Washington and BC, because I feel like we have so many of the same issues on the Salish Sea side and then also on the coast side. And something I'm struggling over, and I think we can talk about as all of these work groups go forward, is how do we efficiently summarize, how do we efficiently give people a place to go deep on some issues? And then how do we also find some real summary options, since we're all so busy and we can't go to everything? So that's something that I'm thinking a lot about. And I think we can talk about it as the different work groups move forward. But that's where I am on this. Is there's so much going on, which is great. And there are so many opportunities, and how do we make sure to be really efficient and optimize all the communications?
Yeah, great point, Helen. And Barb with Pew, I put a little note in the chat earlier. I don't know if you've seen it, but happy to touch base with your team as well, because it sounds like I've seen the emails and it sounds like you guys are doing some work on the communication side as well.
Okay, any last questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much, Jasmine and Margot, and I hope that sign up gets a robust set of attendees. So we're going to move into our next round of brief updates. So the first one, I think we'll hand it over to Julia Ledbetter with DNR, and she's going to talk about the kelp losses over at Squaxin Island, which I think several of you have been privy to, but we wanted to share some more information on. So Julia, you are ready to go.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so I wanted to provide a brief update of our kelp monitoring observations at Squaxin Island in South Puget Sound. This is a photo taken on July 14th from this summer, and you can see that there is very little bull kelp. So for just a bit of background, the bull kelp forest at Squaxin Island has been relatively persistent over the last 145 years. This map shows shorelines with bull kelp in recent years in pink, and Squaxin is circled. In terms of distance from the ocean, Squaxin is the innermost bed within Puget Sound.
Shorelines that have lost their bull kelp forests are identified in blue. We've lost bull kelp from the majority of its historical extent, an 80% decrease relative to its maximum distribution. So the current distribution creates a striking spatial pattern. The main two areas where it persists is at Squaxin, the innermost location, and then Tacoma Narrows at the entrance to South Puget Sound. We've been conducting high-resolution annual monitoring at the Squaxin bed with kayaks since 2013. During the last 10 years, the area has decreased 97% from 8.8 hectares in 2013 to 0.3 hectares in 2022. You can see the contraction on the map. It progressively shrunk both along shore and across shore. So the tiny 2022 footprint is in the center in red. The top graph shows the total area on the y-axis by the year. On the x-axis, the first big drop we observed was in 2014, between 2014 and 2016. And then the bed was relatively stable until this year when we saw another extreme drop. So elevated water temperature is a concern here, and there are two big heat events that do coincide with drops, the observed drops in area. The bottom figure shows changes over time in maximum and minimum depth. The maximum depth has contracted from more than 4 meters in 2013 to around 2 meters now. And if we zoom in on 2022, the red perimeter shows the extent, but the white dots represent all the individual kelp bulbs or clusters of bulbs that we counted. So in all, we counted roughly 85 plants this year, and 20 to 25 of those bulbs had no blades whatsoever. So the Squaxin plants show many signs of stress. I'll go through a couple stressors that we're seeing. The first, we see plants signs of plant degradation. Blades tend to be thin, they're often eroded, reduced, or completely absent. We also see surface tissue damage, which we think is a lot of it is due to crabs. And then endophytes and epiphytes are also common on the bulbs and stipes. We also have very abundant kelp crabs, which could, their herbivory could play a role in kelp growth and survival. Impaired water quality is another stressor. At Squaxin, the water is turbid, which would be associated with sediment, plankton, or other suspended matter. And water temperatures are also very high in the summer. The graph shows the daily maximum temperature at Squaxin in red and Salmon Beach in blue, and Salmon Beach is in the Tacoma Narrows. In the summer, we've recorded daily maximum temperatures between 16 and 18 degrees Celsius. And then water column nutrients at the site are also incredibly low during the summer. And then another stressor, the introduced alga sargassum is abundant at the site and is known to compete with native kelp. Other algal species also may be competing for space at the site. Large Desmarustia has been observed in high abundance throughout the bed. So we still have ongoing monitoring at the site. We're doing some morphometric and condition work. We have UAV surveys, subtidal dive surveys by the DNR dive team, and we have water temperature and light sensors deployed at the site, and we're working on a report this winter on the status of the site. And while this talk focused on the dramatic decline at DNR, we've recorded at Squaxin. Squaxin is one of 13 sites in South and Central Puget Sound monitored by DNR for kelp. So the other sites are on the map. So we're currently working up all the 2021 and 2022 data from all of our sites, from both kayak and drone surveys for a report this winter. That is my brief summary.
Okay, so we had a couple of questions in the chat that Helen has managed to respond to. Any other quick questions for Julia? Okay, thank you, Julia. Let's move now to Jackie S. with Reef Check to talk about the 2022 dive sites in Puget Sound.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Julie, I'm going to ask you one question before I start. Are there any subtidal surveys that happen at those other monitoring, like surface canopy sites?
The DNR dive team does subtidal surveys at Salmon Beach as well. And I know PSRF has some sites that they do subtitle surveys that
correspond. Yeah.
Yeah, just to jump in, Jackie, our hope, and I say this looking at PSRF and you and everyone, is that we can co-locate as much as possible. And so that we'll end up with both surface and understory monitoring.
Well, with that, I'm gonna give a little update on what Reef Check has been up to for the last few months. We are going to be wrapping up our survey season starting by the end of the month. So a little bit about what we've been doing. This year, we were able to certify 50 divers in our survey monitoring protocols. So we ran 3 citizen science courses over the spring and certified 31 recreational divers, have 4 crossover divers, meaning they were divers for Reef Check in other regions that we operate from Southern California to Oregon. And they learned some of the things that we tweaked for this area and the species that we count here. So 4 crossover divers, and then we did some classes with partner agencies. So we did a course, or we taught our protocols during the subtitle ecology course at Friday Harbor Labs this summer. So there are 9 new scientific divers that are participating in Reef Check. We did a course with the Samish tribe, and so we have a couple new tribal divers, and then a calibration dive. We did our protocols with the wetland ecology team at sites that they had already been monitoring, and they are now doing our protocols at their monitoring sites. And just a brief overview of what that means is we are doing transect-based density counts. And so a site includes 6 core transects of invertebrates, fish, algae, and UPC reef characterization, and then an additional 12 fish only transects, because fish move and we want better those fish density counts are. On those transects, we're counting 29 species of fish, 26 species of invertebrates, 13 macroalgae, including that invasive sargassum. And then our UPC has 9 substrate categories, 10 cover, 4 relief. And then in Washington, this is different than our other regions, is we added this super layer because we have such abundant understory kelp that we want to make sure that we're capturing all of those blades that kind of lay over the top of our substrate. In order to survey all of our sites, we partnered with lots of different groups. So Puget Sound Restoration Fund is a big one. They did a series of sites as well as their other projects in restoration. DNR, the Wetland Ecology Team through the Aquatic and Fishery Sciences at University of Washington, Friday Harbor Labs when we assisted with that course. And then the Samish Indian Nation and Point Divine Soon Aquarium are all groups that participated in surveys this year. And this is a map of all of the sites that we were able to complete. And I'm going to add the link so you can interact with this map a little bit, but it has our 22 sites that were done by our citizen science divers, as well as an additional 12 sites that were completed by those different various partner groups. You'll notice that there are a few of those marks that are still yellow. So like I said, we're going to be surveying through the end of the month, and we have 3 sites that we intend to finish before the end of the year. So we'll hopefully have 25 sites by the end of October all completed. And then looking into the future, as we're kind of wrapping up this season, we're looking at what's next. And so we're going to continue to grow our citizen science team, and we'll start our courses again in the spring, leading up to our next survey season. Throughout the winter and into next summer, we'll continue to build partnerships. So if you're a group that is interested in helping us grow our site locations or our dive teams, or want to participate in some of those partnership trainings, feel free to reach out, let me know. And then we also want to continue to expand those sites, so keep covering more area as our dive team grows. And so we're looking to add an additional 10 sites with our citizen science divers, including expanding out into the Western Strait of Juan de Fuca and even out on the open coast. And that number might be bigger if we include some more of those partnership divers, because we'll have bigger dive teams. And so if any of these things is something you're interested in participating in more, my email is there, and I can also copy and paste that into the chat so it's easier to get to. Yeah, feel free to reach out. We can get you involved or get your organization involved. And we're feeling good about this first season and looking forward to what comes next.
So when we're done, Jackie, I'll point you to the hype team in the chat. Lots of excitement. That's great. We have a few minutes. Any questions for Jackie? Going once. Helen. And then Eliza.
I'm just wondering, Jackie, I know we're going to start analyzing the data from our partner sites. What are your plans? How does Reef Check approach data analysis and putting out results? Like, will there be a website or where? Yeah, what's your short-term plan?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit, but Dan's on here as well and knows has more insight into our database. But we have not only volunteer divers, but volunteer data enterers. So we have a crew that's helping us enter all of the data from these sites currently. And then once all of that is QA/QC, then we can share that those files with anyone that's interested in that information. And maybe I'll let Dan add anything if you'd like to build on that.
No, that's good. I mean, all of our data should be entered in soon. We kind of pride ourselves on a fast turnaround. And then, yeah, we have a database where it's easily exportable. It's publicly available. So anybody who wants, access to that, please email Jackie or myself. I can put my email address in the chat. But yeah, it's all available.
Okay, Eliza.
Yeah, thanks. So excited to see all of this. And I'm wondering, so Dan and I talked about this a while ago, and I'm just curious in general, in terms of dive approvals with people who are AAUS. This is something coming from the Smithsonian side that has been the biggest nightmare of all time. Just getting people in the water at the same time is like virtually impossible. Any developments in terms of being able to have Reef Check divers in the water and potentially UW divers in the water at the same time? And is that something y'all are exploring, or is that still kind of a next frontier?
It's definitely possible. So Reef Check is a AAUS OM. That said, like, we kind of have a two-tiered program. So our citizen science divers are one tier, and then a smaller subset like staff and some of our volunteers who've gone through other programs are sort of full AAUS divers. So we can't operate where, those divers go, partner with other boats and programs.
Gotcha. Okay. And the portion, the divers that are AAUS in Reef Check Washington, is there a chunk of AAUS folks who are in that it's not hierarchical, the AAUS tier?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There definitely is, including, some volunteers who, went through Friday Harbor Labs, the course there, or some of our partner agencies, as well as just some of our volunteers. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions for our Reef Check team? Okay, we will move to our next presenter. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Dan. Okay, so next up we have Chris Newfield with Kelp Rescue, and he's going to be talking about early observations of patterns of loss.
Hi there. Thanks for all the great presentations so far. Nice to hear all these updates, and I'm always so impressed by all these massive teams of divers and folks working together in Washington. It's so impressive to see all that work. So I'm just going to talk quickly about just a sort of high-level analysis that we undertook this summer for BC waters, in part to just sort of get at this question that, you know, we're seeing these losses of kelp in a bunch of places. There's all this very good high-resolution spatial data for Puget Sound, and seeing these kind of patterns of loss and persistence. And there's lots of very detailed work happening in BC, mostly through remote sensing and some other field observations happening at some kind of focal places. But we wanted to get a sense just with publicly available imagery as to what's happening in kind of more of the extent of the BC coast. We've seen some losses well documented in Barkley Sound through our work and some other places. What's happening in kind of the rest of the coast. And so we just took advantage of publicly available imagery. Hold on, let me just get going here. There we go. Both through the Shore Zone program that's ongoing in BC, and also some Environment Climate Change Canada flights that happened in BC as well, to really compare kind of historical, you know, one set of historical photos from in different places or in different years, to a set of kind of modern photos that were captured in subsequent years, kind of post heat wave, just to see in general with these kind of before after snapshots what's happening in BC. So here's just a couple. They're kind of small because I threw this together quickly from a figure, but just an example of kind of a before photo on the left and an after photo on the right. A couple of pairs of them, just showing some changes in canopy kelp just from these aerial photos. And we did that for 30 to 50 meters shoreline segments across a bunch of different regions of BC to kind of get a sense as to what was happening. And so just to give you an example of what that looks like after we code those. So red is a place where a segment of shoreline, the kelp has blinked out over that time window. Kind of light blue is where kelp has been stable, and then kind of a dark blue is a shoreline segment where there's been a gain in fringing kelp along that shoreline segment. So that's just an example of a place, Dundas Island, on the kind of northern reaches of BC, right near the Alaska border, showing quite extensive losses, mostly on the inside, kind of more protected shore side of that island. And so we did that for a bunch of different regions of BC. Here's another example a little bit further down the coast, again showing some kind of losses more concentrated on the inside of these islands. And then other places in BC, so this is now kind of moving down the coast. We actually saw some gains in some places as well, which was heartening to see. It's not all losses. And then this is just sort of an example here of what some of those photos look like, where we would see gains in the kind of before versus after photos. But these pairs of images I'm showing you aren't sort of random, it turns out. It turns out that these losses that we're seeing seem to be places where there are no otters. And I'll show you a photo after that shows some, you know, urchins very clearly moving up into the intertidal in some of these places. Whereas these images on the bottom are places where otters are present and have been increasing exponentially through as documented in Fisheries and Oceans Canada surveys over the last, let's say, 10 or 15 years. So there do seem to be changes. What does this look like spatially across the BC coast writ large? And again, this is just where we could piece together these sets of images. So it's sort of, we tried to get these places where there were these pairs of images. And also sort of, unless folks contributed data sets, which a number of people did, to kind of exclude some of the places where there have been some really high level analyses that are just yet unpublished. So not to sort of, you know, steal the thunder of that work, that more detailed work, but really just to kind of focus on a broad BC-wide coverage. So we see these patterns. So these are some examples of these places where we're seeing losses over that time point. Down here, kind of further south, closer to Washington, Salish Sea, Strait of Juan de Fuca, we're seeing losses as well, which seem to be consistent with patterns of temperature. So what you're seeing on the left here, this inset, is just a couple places where we've compared the August 2017 outputs from the live ocean model as sort of a proxy for what's happening with surface temperature to what's happening with kelp loss. And you can see, much like in Puget Sound, these patterns where we're seeing sort of, you know, persistence in some of the cooler water regions and more losses in some of the warmer water regions. And then this is just the kind of same stretch from Barkley Sound all the way across the outer coast. You know, where the water is cool on the outer coast, we're seeing very stable populations. Where the water gets warmer into the sound, we're seeing more losses. And then finally, these are three of the regions where otters have been increasing exponentially, where we see those gains sort of concentrated. So that's just a very high level analysis. I've got a bunch more data I won't show you that kind of backs up some of these patterns. But really some takeaways are, you know, there's no obvious latitudinal gradients here in these patterns. It's sort of local and regional scale factors that seem to be influencing what's happening with kelp in these places. Losses in the Juan de Fuca Strait and Salish Sea seem to be consistent with known temperature gradients. Outer coast outer coast regions seem to be quite stable, which is sort of what we expect based on what we're seeing in some other parts of Washington, for instance. And yeah, so I guess that's just the last takeaway there. And I just want to, I'm just looking at the time. I'll stop there. I had a few other updates, but I'll stop there and just take questions if there are any.
And we're actually doing pretty well on time, so we'll take some questions. And if there are any other quick updates, Chris, that you want to share, I think we can fit that in.
Sure. Okay. Sure. Maybe I'll just start with questions on this stuff.
Okay, let's do that. Questions? Feel free to raise your hand or throw it in the chat. Helen?
So Chris, could you just, I'm really interested to hear more and see more of the details. And I'm wondering when and where we might expect those. Because of course, we're all, I think, or many of us are just really working hard and thinking hard about this temperature and large spatial pattern of loss and persistence that seems to be a common theme. Yeah, so I should have mentioned at the very beginning, so this is work that's being led by, like many other projects, Sam Starko. So he's led a bunch of these analyses. We've kind of collaborated on compiling a bunch of data. And a bunch of other folks in BC have contributed data sets, including some folks on this call for some of these kind of other regions. And our goal here is, as I said, to really, in some ways, just get something in the literature that sort of points to some of these challenges, so kind of patterns that we're seeing in some hypotheses, I guess, so that we can lean on that to leverage for some of these kind of awareness conversations with the general public and policymakers and some of the stuff that, you know, it has worked really well in Washington in terms of funding and awareness. So our goal is to get this out in an open access journal, submitted as a preprint in the next couple months, and ideally published kind of quite quickly. So we're not aiming sort of for a big flashy thing. We're just aiming to get this out there and published somewhere in an open access journal. So you can expect that as a preprint probably within the next few months, and I'll share that around with this group when it comes out. And yeah, we've added things like, you know, we've tried to look at time series where time series are available to get a sense. You know, one of the common kind of refrains we get when we talk about this stuff is, yeah, kelp goes up and down a lot. It's really variable. Maybe it's just you're just getting these snapshots at weird times and you're picking up patterns that aren't there. So we've really tried to pull out as many time series as we could. But you know, we're sort of that's a hypothesis to be proven by others. If there's data that really shows that these are just fluctuating kind of standard, you know, El Nino oscillations or something, great, show me the data. Until then, my sense is from what we're seeing is that there really are some persistent losses in a bunch of these places, and the time series that we do have are bearing those out.
Other questions? Okay, Chris, I think you have time if you want to share a couple of other updates.
Sure, I'll just share a couple slides just on updates on what else is happening with our kind of growing program. So, you know, beyond the kind of science program, we're also working on some restoration initiatives. So just kind of updates on a few of the regions that we're working. So we're working on a bull kelp green gravel outplant right around Vancouver and Burrard Inlet, supporting the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation and some of their restoration goals in the area. And so that will be happening in the kind of late winter, early spring, to ideally coincide with the sort of the right season for outplanting bull kelp that we've seen so clearly from Puget Sound Restoration Fund. So that's some ongoing work that we'll have updates on kind of next summer. in Barkley Sound, we're going to do a similar thing with macrocystis at a few sites to kind of just get at some, some first trials of macrocystis outplants using green gravel primarily, and sort of comparing, kind of tying to our genomics work to sort of compare the genetic provenance of the outplants and how that affects restoration success in collaboration with, or led by a postdoc in Julia Baum's lab, kind of taking over for Sam Starko now that he's just recently moved off to Australia. So that, again, updates kind of in the spring, summer. And then lastly, we do have ongoing genomics work. So this is just a figure put together by Jordan Bemmels, just to kind of show the extent of genomics work that we have ongoing, now fully funded to do high quality genome assemblies. So those are kind of ongoing. We're pleased to see that we can finally get high molecular weight DNA out of kelp. So that was a big success recently, that we kind of cracked the code, which is not easy with all the slime, as we know. So working on those two things based out of the Reesburg lab at UBC. And then in terms of the population genomics work that we're doing, this is just a map of where we have samples currently for the population genomics work that we're doing. Some of that's helped out by folks at Friday Harbor. And we're certainly looking to, expand these samples. Our focus is mostly in Canada, but we do want this work to be relevant to other folks. And once you're kind of doing these analyses and you have the pipelines, it makes sense to kind of add as many samples as you can, because that part's actually quite cheap and kind of easy to scale. So we'll be reaching out to folks if folks do want to contribute samples from other regions, including, all the way down to outer coast Washington, Oregon, California, up to Alaska for macrocystis. Including to sort of get at this species concept distinction with macrocystis. So, we've been debating for a long time, or maybe it's sort of settled in the literature at the moment that, we've got this one species. We'd like to compare the sort of Pyrifera morph to the Integrifolia morph from a few different regions where we can find them kind of near each other to see if there is actually some more nuanced differences there that we could pull out. And then for Nereocystis, much more extensive coverage. And again, same thing, we're looking to get some additional samples. So just reach out if you'd like to collaborate on that stuff, or send us some samples. And then finally, in Julia Baum's lab, there's a PhD student in Matt Shortus who led a whole series of ROV surveys and drop camera surveys this summer. So 450 ROV surveys, I think, perpendicular to shore, which we're now coding all those data for kelp occupancy to put into some species distribution modeling. But just sort of, I'd love to chat with any folks that are continuing to think about ROV and drop camera work to get kind of broader spatial coverage for what's happening with kelp. And there's kind of some stuff we pioneered, or not pioneered, but sort of worked on that's been successful this summer that we'd love to share and talk about for ROV work with folks. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Chris. I will let people direct any remaining questions to Chris via the chat, and we will move on to our next update with Dave Lowry from NOAA to talk about the petition for the ESA listing of bull kelp. And did Dave join? I know he was coming in late.
Yes, I joined. Give me just a second.
Perfect.
Here. I'm trying to get my screen to share correctly. Always a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Zoom is notoriously a pain for federal employees. All right. So hopefully you're seeing my screen now.
Looks great.
Okay. Just to clarify here, I am not the recovery coordinator for kelp. I am not the lead on anything here. But because of my recent activities as the petition evaluator for Sunflower Sea Stars and coordination with a variety of different groups that are also monitoring your habitat and kelp, and my interactions with rockfish recovery and therefore kelp, many people have been asking me questions about the petition to list bull kelp. So what I'm going to do here today is just briefly run you through the process, not what's going to happen, not is it going to be listed, not anything like that yet, because we're still very, very early in that process. And so I just want to make sure that everybody's clear on the process and understands what this petition means as far as timeline and everything else. So we have received a petition. I'll go into the details on this for bull kelp in just a minute, but what happens when NMFS receives a petition to list a species under the ESA? Well, first off, there's a quick review. We've got 90 days to take a look at it. And theoretically, we can look at the petition and say, no, there's nothing here. The species is not imperiled, not threatened. There's nothing to work with here. And we can kick it out as a 90-day finding. And this does happen. There are circumstances under which the evidence provided in the petition is not sufficient. More commonly, though, you get a positive 90-day finding, which means that action may be warranted. Again, this does not mean the species is being listed. This means the content of the petition suggests that there could be a listing needed to ensure the persistence of the species. This then goes to a public comment period where we ask specifically for people to weigh in, provide new information, provide anything they've got that's not in the petition. And then a status review is done. A full evaluation, 360 degrees, dragging in experts, dragging in anybody and everybody we can to help us ensure that we've got the right information. Typically, this results in either a 12-month finding of not warranted, again, kicking the species out of the system, stopping the process effectively unless there's a lawsuit, or we move to a warranted positive 12-month finding. And this is where a proposed rule goes forward that says, yes, we're going to potentially list the species as either threatened or endangered. The final step in that is publishing of a final rule. And so as you can see, this is a long process, a lot of steps here, and I'll walk through the exact timing of this for bull kelp in just a minute. So some key terms here, we just heard a little bit of chat about species and whether bull kelp is its own species or is a single species for consideration here. So this will be a question that has to be evaluated. DPSs, distinct population segments, are something that only applies to vertebrate species under the ESA. So our only option here is to establish what the species is, bull kelp, that we're working with, where any breaks might be within the species, and then list the species in its entirety. That's the only potential pathway forward here, to either list or not list the species in its entirety. There is kind of a weird caveat to that. I'll get to that in just a minute. But there are two categories that we can list at, and this is verbatim. This is very dry, I know, so I apologize for that. But essentially, an endangered species is where the best available data that we have shows that throughout a significant portion of the range, or as a species in total, the species is on its way to extinction. A threatened species is one that is on its way to endangered in the foreseeable future. Now again, those yellow terms, let's define a few of those. Significant portion of the range, essentially this is a clause in the ESA that says if a certain geographic component of the population or of the species were to be lost, the species at large would be of greater risk of extinction. And so we only evaluate this if the species is not globally endangered. So if we find that the species is globally endangered, there is no higher tier there. So the species is listed as endangered. If we determine that the species is threatened, then we have to discuss whether a significant portion of the range might be at higher risk and biologically significant enough that if it were lost, the species would be endangered. And at that point, we would upscore the species effectively to endangered rather than threatened. Foreseeable future also has a very specific definition in law, and this is the time period when predictions about the conservation status of the species can be reasonably predicted. So again, fairly dry definition, but I think it's worth noting that these are some very strict criteria, some very tight clauses that we're working with when we're considering the evaluation of the species for listing. So let's talk specifically about bull kelp. We got the petition to list bull kelp from the Center for Biological Diversity on September 1st of this year. That starts the clock. So starting on September 1st, they provided information that says there's been a precipitous decline along the West Coast and into Alaska, and they linked it with global warming. They provided some evidence to support that other things are also threats. Nearshore development, harmful algal blooms, climate change, ocean acidification, a variety of other things. They requested range-wide listing, which is good because we can't do less than that. As I said, there are no DPSs in non-vertebrate species. So NIMS is currently evaluating that petition to determine if an action may be warranted. And because of the fact that we received this petition on September 1st, we now have 90 days. So December 1st would be the 90-day cutoff to determine whether some sort of listing action may be warranted. And again, this is a very low bar, quite honestly. The criterion is, would a reasonable person looking at the information provided in the petition and the information immediately on hand in NIMS's records determine that there is or could possibly be a threat here? So again, very low bar. We're just saying, is there a here? Is there something to evaluate? So right now we are very, very early in the process. We've gotten the petition. We are reviewing it. We are not even to that 90-day phase yet. So there's a lot of game yet to play out here. So what happens if the 90-day finding is positive? So if an action may be warranted, what do we do? Well, this is where a status review team gets convened. I've already been asked to potentially serve on that if the initial 90-day finding comes through. And on that status review team, we would compile all the information from stock assessments, journal articles, anywhere else we can get it. We would also bring in any and everybody outside of the federal government that can provide information. So the 90-day evaluation is just the federal government. It's essentially evaluating whether the administrative process should move forward. But once we get into the status review, that's where we pull in information from other experts. We would then conduct an extinction risk analysis and pull together all the information we can on the viability of the species based on some very specific criteria again, and the threats facing the species, again, in 5 categories, although one of those is other. So effectively, it can be any sort of a threat that we think might really affect the persistence of the species. So just to show you a brief scoring sheet, this is kind of an example of what we've used in the past for other species. So we have very specific criteria, specific questions about those categories of criteria, and each status review team member would then independently score these criteria, discuss, and then evaluate the extinction risk facing the species. The team will not, and they do not decide on endangered or threatened. They simply evaluate the biological extinction risk. There is another tier of evaluation above that that determines whether other conservation actions might come into effect or are doing what is necessary that otherwise the ESA might not provide additional protections for or additional conservation value for. So again, next steps and implications. We're currently reviewing the initial petition. We'll complete that by December. There will be a 90-day public comment period that follows that. So that won't even occur until the initial posting of the 90-day finding, and then into February or March following that. The status review team would then be convened, and again, they have 1 year to complete that evaluation of the petition, the full evaluation. So that would be September of 2023. At that point, if the action of listing is found to be warranted, we would publish a proposed rule in late 2023, have a comment period following that, and then a final rule would go into effect 1 year after that. So if we act fast and this whole process plays out on the timeline that's defined by the ESA protocols, listing, if warranted, would not occur until 2024. So again, there is a lot to play out here. The question of critical habitat is something that could occur concurrent with the initial status evaluation, or often what happens is we say that the listing action is what needs to take place first, and that we don't yet have sufficient information. So we wait a year to designate critical habitat. In this case, that'll be an interesting one because kelp itself being critical habitat and serving these different habitat roles I think it may be prudent to move forward with critical habitat determination as quickly as possible. But again, that's up to the status review team and the policy assessment team that reviews that. So I know that that's a lot to throw at you all at once, but again, these are questions that I've received from a variety of different people over the last couple of weeks, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear on the process itself. If you want additional detail on that process, there is a web page out there that lists not only the process itself and kind of walks through these steps, but also provides a list of species that are currently under review and these other things. So, oh, sorry, I'm not sure why that other piece posted. Oh, that was actually for Chris. I was going to ask about getting in touch with Bob Gunsky from WDFW regarding ROV surveys. But that link that's embedded in there is a link to that webpage. So if I've got time and anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, you can reach out to me. We have not yet determined who the lead for the petition evaluation is going to be. I believe it's going to be led out of the California office, the Long Beach office. But at this point, we haven't identified a specific individual.
Dave, we actually have quite a few questions in the chat. We are a little over on time. So what I propose, let's move into the next agenda item. We have a roundtable at the end of the meeting today. So if we have time, we can come back to those questions. Otherwise, I might point you to the chat because there are some that might be a quick response and there are others that might require a little bit more of a discussion.
Okay, great. I'll try and answer those as quickly as I can here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I know this is a really interesting topic that we're all going to be keeping tabs on. So hopefully we have time to continue that. I want to hand it to Helen. We have some important decisions to make as a group around the future of this work group. So Helen, I'm going to let you take it away. Dave, feel free to stop sharing screen, or maybe I can help you unshare. There we go. Perfect.
So I'm going to share a screen about a poll we all want you to take. And so does everybody see a question?
I don't know if you're sharing yet.
Oh, I am. So that's not working. Actually, why don't you just show us the poll, Elizabeth?
Okay. Would you like to give them a little context before we?
I sure would. I sure would. So Elizabeth's going to give you a poll. Here's the summary. This was a 2-year pilot work group. And you have 3 choices in the poll. And we just want to hear from everyone. We're just wrapping up our 2nd year now with this meeting. So A, B, or C. A, do you think our work is done and we should sunset this group? B, should we continue it for a while in its current format and see how it goes since so much other stuff is spinning up? Or C, should we radically re-envision it?
Okay, I'm launching.
And so we're hoping everyone, we also have input for some other people. And by the way, while people are voting, I'll add that I spoke with some folks in the partnership because we really don't want to step on anyone's toes. And the ones that I spoke to, the 4 that I spoke to, are fine with us continuing.
That's some pretty good news because these are fairly overwhelming responses. I'll give folks a couple more seconds to respond. We are getting pretty close. Okay, we are at, let's see, 78, but the responses are slowing down. I'm not too worried about missing that last 20%, so let's go ahead and share these. Helen, it looks like people really appreciate your facilitation support.
All right, then. So what I would like to ask you all is, for those of you who wanted to overhaul the format, tell us what you'd like. And for those of you who would like to hear different speeches, let us know what you want out of this, and we'll continue it for a while longer. and then we'll ask again. Because we don't want to keep doing this. We all have enough meetings. We don't want to do something that isn't meaningful and worthwhile. So thank you all. And now we're done with that and we can move on to the next options. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we are moving into the roundtable discussion. So we have a few updates / discussion topics queued up, and then we will move into if there are any other updates, and then finally, if we have time, we'll move into kind of some more Q&A with the ESA listing. So the first one, I want to hand it to Tom to give a brief update that was requested, and then we'll move into a conversation regarding implications of seaweed farming for restoration and protecting seaweeds.
Can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay, fine. I'm a little in a mental disconnect here. I'm on a farm in Indiana worrying about soybeans and corn, but we'll get to this in a minute about aquaculture. No, what I wanted to update with people was, and this is sort of a nascent effort here, we have an opportunity to do whole genome sequence for all the species of kelp in the state of Washington, and if we want to, the few more that we've got in British Columbia. This is through the iridiangenomes.org project, and you can look at this thing. And if any of you are interested in this thing, basically what we have to do is get samples, we have to do voucher specimens, send these things off, and then come back and wait. This will be done in conjunction with Sam and Chris's work in British Columbia using the Nereocystis macrocystis long sequence genome. These are, so, as I understand it, short sequence genomes. And so you build a scaffold using these long sequences. So there's an opportunity here. Anybody wants to talk about this and do it, 22 plus species. It'll be helpful for systematics. It'll be helpful for developmental stuff. There's a whole bunch of things that this can be used for in the bigger picture, if you will. So enough said.
Thank you, Tom. That was as brief as you promised. I'm impressed. Very quickly, Mike, we have one quick question, and then we'll move into the next topic.
If you're going to introduce a new shell stock species around Puget Sound,
what
we
now?
all kind of agreed as managers to not move genetic material from one area to the other. Wouldn't it be really important to get the genetic story of Puget Sound detailed before we start moving South Sound kelp into Mid Sound for restoration? If people are desperate to buy starter products to start their farms and their restoration?
My personal view on that is that there are two aspects of that. And this gets more into the population genetics of a single species. And what is that? What is a species? But more importantly, I think there needs to be some very serious discussions with the policy people. What is a species? What is a population? And what are the pros and cons of moving those? In other words, what are we going to allow? So there's kind of two parts to that question. One is, what's the information? What are the implications of it? And then the policy part of it. So it's not a simple thing at all.
Well, right now, there's nothing stopping anybody from taking kelp from any place, selling it and putting it in the water. Is that right?
Jody, are you here on this conversation? Jody Toft?
Yeah, I am. I'm sitting here with my fingers hovering over the keyboard thinking to chat or to talk, to chat or to talk. No, good question, Mike, and thanks, Tom. There's not, a short answer is no. There's nothing that you would find in the WAC or any of the other guidelines that talks about the rules and regulations around moving kelp around. However, that doesn't mean that getting ahead of whatever will be coming out from any of the regulators isn't a fabulous idea. So having that baseline understanding of what the kind of the genetic lay of the land is, in particular for bull kelp and for sugar kelp, is probably a smart thing to do. So the work that Chris mentioned, and then the work that our team has going on as well for bull kelp, understanding that lay of the land across this the Salish Sea is really important. What I would point out here, and Max Calloway, I'm looking at you a little bit, we don't have a great sense of what that looks like for sugar kelp, and maybe that would be something that would be worth somebody on this team pursuing, either through the HSIL process or some other process, because we're really devoid of that intel right now. And I think it's going to become a challenge.
Yeah, and I can jump in really quick, Jody, about that. Yeah, like the timing of source production, like what we're basing that off of, and I'm speaking specifically about sugar kelp here because that is the species, obviously, that is most interested in, you know, people growing commercially. So we really only have published data on Saurus production for populations in British Columbia here, and then the rest of the information on that is going to be based off of local practitioners and their collections. I got a little bit surprised when I went up to the San Juans, expecting at least some unripe Saurus on the sugar kelp populations there, based on my experience with Brian and Puget Sound Restoration Fund down in Central Sound. I only found old Saurus, likely from overwintering populations, and that Saurus was kind of not the greatest looking and on the kind of terminal halves of the blades, which got me thinking about this question of timing and how that will be playing into more farms coming in. And then as we're all talking about the lack of, you know, any regulations for collections. I know, I believe, Helen, you and I, we looked at some draft materials from NOAA based off of some of the Alaska regulations, and those regulations do place geographic, unless they've changed them, and unless I'm wrong, I believe they've put geographic restrictions on how far from your farm site you can collect seed. And, you know, frankly, I think that is a fairly common sense and, you know, pretty good place to start. But again, it's going to mean more information on local populations and their timing.
Oops, I just realized I was muted. Tom, I'm going to give you the last word on this one, and then we'll move to the next topic if you have it.
Yeah, there's a host of problems here, and frankly, it would be a great topic to queue up for conversation within this group, I think, in the future. There's all kinds of ins and outs to this one. It's heavily influenced, I would offer, by people working in invertebrates and fish and shellfish as well. This is not just a kelp or a seaweed issue. And a lot of the concerns, think, Jody, if I'm not mistaken, come from DFW, who have had experiences with salmon genetics and hatcheries and so forth. So there's more to it than just seaweed.
Yeah, and what I want to do, although I did hear what you said, Elizabeth, about Tom at the last word, is I want to make sure that, Tom, you see Hank's comment, Hank Carson's comment from DFW that's in the chat, as DFW is beefing up this side of their program, and they're bringing on somebody with a lot of training in this space. And so we're excited that DFW is going to have some more capacity to be able to dig into this, because it is a big question for all of us out there doing restoration or perhaps commercial cultivation of kelp.
And I think those of you looking at that chat, it's not necessarily just genetics, it's pest, it's diseases, and so forth, of which we know, I would offer, very little about in the kelp world or the seaweed world.
Okay, so before we move on to the next discussion item, I just wanted to remind folks, you can also, if you have updates, feel free to throw those in the chat. It's great for the group to read, but also we will be capturing all of the chat and putting it in a summary that you can access later from the website. So feel free to share any information, and we'll also be capturing those questions and responses in that meeting summary as well, so that you can refer back to them. So Helen and Tom are going to facilitate a brief discussion around seaweed farming. So I've been told to pass the mic to Helen, and then Tom will help facilitate this discussion.
Hi, everyone. So we've had a bunch of requests for this group to think about the implications of seaweed farming for both how could it be helpful for restoring and protecting seaweeds, and also what might the impacts be. And we haven't quite figured out how to address it. So we just wanted to spend a few minutes here, and Meg Chadzy's on too. So I was hoping to spotlight the person who asked most recently, who's Hugo Flores, Meg Chadsey, and Tom Mumford, to think more. And I'm not sure, Meg or Tom, who wants to talk first, but how could we talk about this for a few minutes and figure out if there are people or ways that we could address this in future meetings, or people who are addressing this most? I highlight Meg because she's got a related work group already. So I'll pass it over now to Meg or Tom or whoever wants to jump in. And talk.
Well, I apologize. Hello, everyone. Meg Chadzi with Washington Sea Grants, she, her pronouns, and I was looking at my email. So when you say talk about this, Helen, I don't know what this is. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's fine. So here's the question. We have a lot of questions and they've come in before, and we just got another one about what are the implications of seaweed farming for restoring and protecting seaweeds? And there might be some positive outcomes from seaweed farming. There also might be negative impacts. And so we're wondering where we could have a forum for these types of discussions. And as background, I've put a link to a one of the most recent stories that's talking about the number of potential new seaweed farms that are happening in Puget Sound. And so I asked Tom initially to facilitate some talking, and we can let you take a back seat for a moment, Meg, if you'd prefer. To think a little bit about how this group might think about that. What are our thoughts? What are our concerns? What work's going on, et cetera?
Tom should probably set the stage, but do save me a minute at the end. Thanks.
No, okay, you can gather your thoughts here. I this all landed on my lap about an hour or so ago here. So what are the impacts? The impacts of seaweed farms was kind of the question that was posed to me. There's one seaweed farm that I'm aware of that's actually operating. This is the Blue Dot folks in Hood Canal. There are at least 3 in the permit process, and there are others gathering steam, shall we say. And all of these have had various questions asked by permitting agencies, by concerned citizens and so forth about, so how do we permit these folks? How do we get them? What kind of impacts will they have, and how do those relate to permitting? And so it also interacts with how do these folks work or don't work with restoring and protecting seaweed. And I think everybody kind of is known by now that there's a fair amount of overlap in the kind of some of the techniques or some of the ideas that are presented here. I would offer that there is an opportunity for this group to maybe start to think about and maybe form a subgroup about, so who needs to know what? And there are a whole variety of stakeholders in this thing. What do they want to know? How can that information be provided? What are those impacts? And I would offer that they're not just sort of biological impacts, but there's also social, economic impacts as well that should be looked at here. Dana's here, can talk a little bit about perhaps the Pew group and the group we're working with there on the existing policies regarding restoration, conservation, protection of kelp. How are those being enforced or not enforced, and how do those overlap with or interact with seaweed permitting? The main thing I'm concerned about is that whoever looks at this and works with it is as neutral a party as you can be. You have to be trusted by all the different people, and you have to provide answers that will be trusted by everybody. You can't go off in one way, environmental groups versus, say, people that are for or against aquaculture. You can't be a pro aquaculture group. You have to thread that careful needle down the middle. And can this group work in such a way that might help provide that kind of information? Sea Grant historically has been doing a fairly good job with that. So there's a lot of ins and outs of this thing, but so there's like, what do we need to know? Who gets the information? How's it provided? How's it disseminated? How is it actionable? Is it something that the permitting people and the stakeholders can bite into and work with? So those are just some off the top of my head thoughts about something that this group, a subgroup, might want to move forward with helping organize.
Okay, now is time for my plug, and I really appreciate this opportunity. So what Tom just described as needed, Sea Grant, along with the Restoration Fund and the Nature Conservancy, is taking the first step in hosting what we have called the Seaweed Knowledge Symposium. I may have mentioned this last time the group met. This is a all-day in-person, everybody come together and really talk about what do we know about seaweed. And this is sort of coming from the farming cultivation side, but cultivation that includes cultivation propagation for restoration purposes, for all the reasons one might propagate seaweed and kelp. And this will have one day to get a lot of people in the room to talk about what we do know and what we don't know, and hopefully what we don't know that we don't know, and the impacts, both positive and negative potential impacts of seaweed farming on restoration and conservation of kelp will be one of many topics that gets touched on that day. So our goal at Sea Grant is to have this one-day symposium kick off and inform subsequent action. And I think a work group, you shouldn't wait for December to get started, but a work group coming out of, led by this, Helen, your gang, I think would be a fantastic one to sort of take up that particular torch. At Sea Grant, who knows, maybe in the future we'll have the capacity and the expertise to really do that broad synthesis and turn out the sort of neutral scientific analysis that we are known for. But I don't think we're in that position right yet to, and I am not an expert. I am very much in the role of the convener at this point. But I hope to get a save the date announcement for this upcoming symposium out to the world very soon. And I will make sure, Helen, that you and Elizabeth have that so you can share it with everyone in this group. Thank you.
I would offer that this group, well, let's say, Jody, you want to go ahead? I see Jody's hands up here, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is a great idea to pull together a little think tank here on this. I think one reason that it's a good idea is that the brain trust sort of is in this virtual room right now. Also, with the 10,000 acre target that we'll all somehow be marching towards for kelp and eelgrass recovery. One of the aspects of that needs to be evaluated, as it's written in the bill itself, is to understand the role of using aquaculture techniques and farming as a way to get towards that goal. So we're going to need to address this anyway, and I think that there really are pros and cons that I see your comment in the chat, Todd, that are really place-based about how, where, and why you would be using conservation, restoration, any type of aquaculture that could be for the joint benefit of commercial purposes and restoration purposes. Thumbs up and thumbs down trade-offs, and lots of places where you might apply aquaculture as a technique, but this kind of is a brain trust that I think could probably bring some knowledge to bear and help guide that conversation in a useful way, following the structure that you laid out at the beginning here, Tom.
There's an amazing opportunity here for us to put together, as you said, the brain trust. There is a lot of people with incredible expertise here. We're probably missing, I would say, the social science part of this expertise in this group. This is mainly a biological group, and I would offer that one would be thoughtful about other aspects of this, i.e. the social aspects of it as well. So Helen and Elizabeth, a couple of questions. One is, this is something that might be a topic coming up we could spend a fair amount of time with on an upcoming meeting, and organize speakers and thoughts and sort of maybe focus on who could do what and how it might happen. That would be one question. The second one, Elizabeth, I was just seeing all this money being waved around in front of everybody here. Is this something that could be a possible a grant opportunity to put together a proposal?
I'll let Helen talk about the coordination of this conversation and what forum is right. To your question, I don't know, Tom. I'm not qualified to answer that yet, but I think that is definitely something that should be explored.
Okay.
And I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up because I see people signing off, and I know we all spend too much time on Zoom. Too much time on Zoom. But I'll follow up with a bunch of you all on those two hot topics that just came up at the end. You know, this work group, we try to keep it to updates. And so we may want to do some kind of subgroup where we discuss those things in more detail. But the other thing that Tom just mentioned is good, is there's a lot of, you know, this is a group for sharing information. We're not funded to do work in this group. And so it would really be a spin-off. But we can provide the forum, which is great. So on that note,
I was going to say,
yeah.
I'll let you close us out.
Yeah, on that note, thank you all so much. We will put this, we'll put the notes, the agenda, and the recording online for all of you to use. And Eliza, you may be one of the people we're going to rope into further discussion on kelp farming. So thank you all. It's always a pleasure to see you all and hear what's going on and collaborate. So thanks.
Good. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.